So we as scientists need to kind of have very clear policy points out of our research. When I read the poetry of Sheikhul Alam, and when you try to interpret it in present day's context, it seems that Sheikhul Alam is still alive and she's speaking to us. This dialogue of wisdom needs to be promoted.
Scientifically think and go क्या? What does it mean?
साइंटिफिक टेम्परामेंट इज फॉर एग्जाम्पल घर में इंस्टीट्यूशंस में पब्लिक में छोटी छोटी प्रॉब्लम्स होती है फॉर एग्जाम्पल जैसे कहाँ चीज इतने होते हैं पकना हो चूंकि तुलाना से यार नखस ना छुटना पैती न चुका you think hey can I create something a small solution that drive
right.
आराम से उधर
Small machine.
आप उधर डिपार्टमेंट देखोगे हम अक्सर कि छोटी छोटी ये इनोवेटिव ये जो है चीजें जो उन्होंने इजाद की हैं for these small, apparently they look small, but they are not so small. Solutions to their problems. Scientific temper is to think practically. How can we solve this problem? How can we approach this problem? How can we understand this problem? I would say in the schools we need to have a space where you have all these what you call as nuts and bolts of science in terms of small gadgets and the things.
Right.
You give them you put students there. These are your gadgets. This is your space. Whatever the idea you have, come up with something.
Right.
Take them out in the forest. Tell them that this is the forest. This is what its different layers are. This is what different types of forests are. This is a just wetland.
How will science communication help us?
If every researcher who publishes a very high impact paper comes up with a common man's version of it in a one pager or a half a pager, or every PhD thesis that is submitted in science, how do you basically think about science and how do you put the evidence for anything together globally and then say you come up with what you call as the policymaker's summary. My point is whatever if my government for example tells me that we have given you this much of money, how is it that you have contributed to the policy making? So we as scientists need to kind of have the clear policy points out of our research, telling them likewise common man's perspective se bhi jo dekhna hai. So that is what we need to
So
think
there
about.
there is where comes the question of society outreach also.
Yes.
What exactly we are lacking not to reach to the society, and why many of our projects, especially science projects, do not directly, where people don't feel any kind of use in them directly.
The science that we are doing here, we need to of course publish it in the high reputed journals, no doubt about it.
Yes, high impact journals.
We need to basically go for patents, no doubt about it. But at the same time, I believe outreach is that telling our scientific stories to the common man in the common man's language, to the kids in their own at their own level, in their own. For example, the culture of internships, for example, हमारे यहाँ पे है नहीं इतना ज़्यादा जितना. But you see, we churn out these graduates and the postgraduates every year through a very traditional system, and ultimately they end up not doing anything substantial. How good it would be, for example, in the media only. आप मीडिया के ही किसी स्टूडेंट को जिसने पास आउट किया यूनिवर्सिटी से उसको हम बताएंगे भाई इस फैकल्टी के मेजर जो सर्टिफिकेशन उसको कवर कर लीजिए, बी इट प्रिंट मीडिया, बी इट इलेक्ट्रॉनिक मीडिया, बी इट सोशल मीडिया. मतलब एक तो उसका बेसिकली एक प्रैक्टिकल एंगेजमेंट हो जाएगा. It would be a learning for him, and then basically there would be a dissemination of the information. या for that matter, say for example, botany में मैंने किसी स्टूडेंट को मास्टर्स करवाया या PhD करवाया. इसको let him, for example, of environment and forests for maybe say 3 months. And with their office, say what are the issues? For example, what kind of interventions we need to have in the forests? What are your expectations? And understanding the perspective and coming back and telling us that these are the issues there. We need to basically. So this culture of internships also is something very important.
Right.
Then for the outreach, I believe we can have what we call as one open science day on the campus, or one open science week, when we invite all the kids from the schools or even the colleges come over and see the facilities and look at what we are doing. And you facilitate. You basically have the ideation hackathons, workshops. You basically give students a kind of ambience that makes them think creatively. We need to take students there. We need to basically give them, and I believe some of us can also create such facilities at a smaller scale at our own homes. Look, you designate मकान से ईद बड़ी रोजान से किस कमरे में just create one space एक कमरे में आप बच्चों को दे दीजिए भाई this is your lab do whatever you want to do दीवार है don't worry you want to write anything on the wall write it feel free हाँ पेलिंग शिन मुझसे कारण क्या है ठीक है unfortunately मैं तो इतना अच्छा मतलब या फॉर दैट मैटर ये आपके पास गैजेट्स हैं और बताइए मुझे चाहिए क्या वी हैव टेल मी अब उसके लिए चाहिए क्या गैजेट we have to get them for example you say radio फट रहा हो तो कार से कनेक्ट भी ये सेल फोन है इसके साथ just tinker with it and see what you can do for example you know in the schools the discourse has to be now different.
Professor Manzoor Sahab, in 2020 National Education Policy was introduced and a lot of hopes are being pinned that it really is going to boost creativity, innovation among the students. What is your hope on NEP?
रिसर्च की है हमने बात किया साइंटिफिक टेम्पर की बात की so there is a lot of emphasis on interdisciplinarity and multidisciplinarity in NEP per se. So far we have been always thinking in our close cocoons. For example, if I'm doing science I just do not think about the other for example disciplines. This reminds me of a talk that I heard way back in 2003. He was Torsten Wesel. He was awarded Nobel Prize, I think in 1980s, for the work that he had done on the development of vision in the primates. He was a neurobiologist, more like. At the end of his talk, something he said, and that really echoes in my mind and is connected to what you said, was there's a problem in the world, and more so in the developing world. He probably referred that time to India and the other countries like this, that those who are doing science or natural sciences, they completely ignore or divorce the other sciences. When the fact, for example, social sciences or the humanities or the literature, then the fact of the matter is that they are connected at a larger plane. To my mind, the beauty of NEP is that it encourages a dialogue, what you call as the dialogue of wisdom. And what do we mean by that dialogue of wisdom? It is, for example, you bring people from different fields on the same table, from one who is doing social science, literature, or for example the natural sciences, bring them on the same table and tell them just talk about what you can do together. The approach of a social scientist is very different than an approach of a natural scientist.
Correct.
And that's where the conflicts actually arise. But the dialogue of wisdom tells you that, first point right from you start is that we're all equals.
Right.
Natural science is not probably superior to the social sciences, and literature is not probably inferior to any of them. So once you start from this point, you enter into a dialogue. So what are now the possibilities of cooperation and the collaboration? A student who is in the undergraduate program, who completes his undergraduate program, for example, after 3 years or 4 years for that matter, if they have this more than 75%, they can switch over to either a master's or for them sometimes directly to the research as well. So which was not ever thought of earlier. This is what actually happens in the West. Undergraduate level say students need, to think in scientific terms, need to basically, I would say in research terms. Say for example, how and why of it, as we were referring
Right.
to.
And one more important thing related to this question only is earlier we had a lot of emphasis on Western models for understanding, sciences and all. Now NEP asks us to, synthesize it with traditional things also, which I think is very important.
That I believe also is a beauty of it.
Yes.
हम इसका क्वेश्चन किस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में उसका
Ah.
I'm a botanist, and as I said, I am a bit of I have a bit of interest in the literature. When I read the poetry of Sheikhul Alam, there is a mention of more than 50 plant species in his poetry. And when you look at the context in which he has used them, and when you try to interpret it in present day's context, it seems that Sheikhul Alam is still alive and he is speaking to us. For instance, this climate change has brought a shift in the phenology of plants. When do they flower? Himalaya is changing in terms of the climate.
Yeah.
What is the evidence? We don't have previous evidence much. You need to create this evidence. In botanical science, we say, for example, if a plant shifts its flowering pattern, is an indication of the climate change. For example, those plant species that would flower in April, they do it in now March. Tang sunt papan cheran sui.
Ah.
Tilma asne kayam de kera. Chana?
Ah.
Look at this. For example, chair car अगर आप देखोगे ना, they come much earlier than after apples.
Right.
Because of this climate change, this is happening. Now the those gaps or those differences that were there between the species, they are kind of evading.
Yes.
And this can have a very devastating consequence.
Right.
For example, इस फिनोलॉजी की स्टडी से हम ये जो प्लांट पॉलिनेटर इंटरेक्शंस है, ये भी बहुत, इट्स अ वेरी फैसिनेटिंग साइंस. मतलब एप्पल मान लीजिए, एप्पल इज आवर से मेजर इंडस्ट्री. एप्पल जो तेली बनाना है सिर्फ पॉलिनेटर ऐसे वक्त पर डेवलप. Climate change से क्या शुरू if apple flowers, for example, 1 month earlier, तब साथ ऐसे is pollinatory. This will lead to complete crop failure, and our whole industry will go. ये जो traditional ecological wisdom है हमारी, if you look at, for example, what our saints and Sufis have, how environment friendly,
They have understood the thing.
lifestyle they have actually lived and they have propagated.
Right.
For example, I had suggested, and through this medium I would really take this idea forward,
Please.
कि ये जो शेखुल आलम ने जिन प्लांट्स का जिक्र किया है, क्या हम इन्हीं प्लांट स्पीशीज का एक छोटा सा बॉटनिकल गार्डन क्रिएट कर सकते हैं, ताकि जब आपके पास लोग बाहर से आए, आप उनको बोले भाई ये प्लांट्स शेखुल आलम ने इस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में यूज, यू टेल स्टोरीज अबाउट द प्लांट्स. बाहर के आप क्यों गार्डन में जाएंगे, किसी और, देयर आर positions of storytellers.
Interesting.
You take a person, he tells you the story. भाई इस प्लांट की नेचुरल हिस्ट्री ये है,
Right.
ये यहाँ से आया है, इसके इकोनॉमिक बेनिफिट्स ये हैं, इसके मेडिसिनल वैल्यूज ये हैं, इसके सोशल कनेक्ट्स ये हैं.
Right.
You actually promote the conservation science
Right.
by promoting this traditional ecological wisdom that we had. If we want our students to become the globally acknowledged scientists, we need to give them reasons that you have the best possible ambience opportunities here than going elsewhere. And I'm sure they will be always motivated to work here.
A dream classroom.
A dream classroom is a classroom where a student, first of all,
Thank you for joining me on Beyond the Shelf. I hope today's conversation sparked something new, a question, a reflection, or maybe even a new direction. Each week we meet someone who is quietly changing the world in their own way. And next week I'll be back with another inspiring guest. Until then, keep looking beyond the surface, beyond the ordinary, and beyond the shelf.